is Labour has made it a key policy as we come into the general elections. Now, what you may not know or not realise is that national rail strikes by train drivers are entering a third, yes, you heard that right, a third summer, with a series of rolling walkouts, one region at a time during May. So members of ASLEF, this is that union, they aim to halt thousands of trains on the 7th, 8th and 9th of May, and commuters who normally go to the office will be targeted on Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays. Now, what they want to do, quite frankly, is to disrupt services on 14 rail firms in England that are controlled by the UK government and represented by the Rail Delivery Group. That is not just what they're doing. They're also putting in 6 days of overtime bans, causing further cancellations from the 6th to the 11th of May. The first day is the early May Day bank holiday. The last one coincides with Take That performing in Manchester. This has been going on for an awfully long time, and taxpayers are throwing tons of money at the railways. We'll talk about what they want, but Labour's response to this is, well, we need to nationalise the railways. Is that the answer? Well, I'm delighted to say joining us now is Bruce Williamson from the campaign group Rail Future. Good morning to you.
Good morning, David.
Really good to talk to you. I mean, I think pretty much all our viewers and listeners feel exactly the same. It's far too expensive. It's unreliable. You never know when the trains are going to run. It's not value for money.
I agree. And the expense issue, the cost of rail tickets, is absolutely in the hands of the government. Let's not forget that the government sets the fare level and they take all the money. So the money that you pay for your rail ticket isn't going to the train operating company, it's going to the Department for Transport. And it's a very deliberate policy that the government have been doing for years and years now to sort of, to keep jacking up prices as much as they can get away with.
But they would say, the government would say, well, hang on a minute, we've actually bailed out the railways. During COVID, they bailed them out 16 billion quid. It costs 5 billion quid a year to subsidise the railways. They say we want our cash back.
Well, they ain't going to get it. OK, but they had no choice to bail out the railways during COVID. The alternative was just to see the whole rail network collapse. And we need the railways on a sort of day-to-day level for practical reasons. It's great for the economy and so on. Every rail system, in the world really requires a subsidy, but other countries seem to do it better than us and put on trains that are affordable.
So we are chucking £90 a second into the railways, which seems extraordinary, £2.8 billion in additional cash over the year. Now, so when we look at other countries and we look at what we've got in this country, we're a relatively small landmass. That's the other thing I don't understand. It also goes back, if I remember rightly, to 1963 and Beeching. If you remember, of course, he shut 5,000 miles or thereabouts of line. I think they lost 2,363 stations. We had an incredible network. They decided to shut a lot of it because it was unprofitable. Does it stem from Beeching? Is it just poor management of privatisation? Or is it the fact that privatisation doesn't work in the railways?
Well, it's a bit of everything. I mean, Beeching made a fantastic mistake, really. I mean, most people think that Beeching got it wrong. He mistakenly assumes that you could just chop out the loss-making bits and be left with a profitable core. But it just doesn't work like that, partly because the unprofitable bits feed in to the profitable bits.
Exactly.
And so what happened was when you shut your branch line, the commuters didn't drive to the nearest station. They just drove all the way to work. They stopped using the railway altogether. So it was part of the lifeblood of the railway was chopped out at that point. So that didn't help. Privatisation, it's sort of been neither a failure nor a disaster. The trains are still running. They're a safe railway. But yet the transformation that we were promised about lower fares and competition, it just hasn't happened. The railway is a natural monopoly. Way back, we favoured, if we were going to privatise it, privatising it wholesale as one lump, because what you want on the railways is integration. And the current model of privatisation really has sort of fragmented the railway, and that, helps to make it less efficient. It adds costs. You've got so many subcontractors and so on. It's all a bit of a mess.
I completely get. So let's take air travel, for example. I completely understand why the privatisation of that works, why you've got independent companies who are competing for your ticket price or whatever it is because they can fly different routes and so on. I do not understand with the railway, because you are set to the same infrastructure, aren't you? You only have one set of rails, multiple operators. How can that... And you mentioned something just then. You said the model doesn't work. So is it that's the problem?
Yeah, I think it is. It's like I say, it's the fragmentation that is the problem. Okay, some people, would argue that why are we letting train operating companies make a profit out of us? If I'm paying, 100 quid for my ticket, I want 100 quid of that to go towards running the railways, not 90 quid and a tenner for the fat cats. I don't think that's entirely fair. The operating margins for the train operating companies are really, really tight. They're making like 1 or 2% profit, but still, some people would argue that that's 1 or 2% more than it should be. Again, I've come back to this notion of fragmentation. It's also worth noting that the railway is part nationalised already. We have 4 train operating companies that are state-owned. LNER has failed 3 times, and each time it's sort of lapsed back into public ownership. So it could be argued that what Labour are proposing is a kind of continuation of what's happened under the Tories.
So let's look at what Labour has proposed. The railways will come under government control within 5 years of a Labour government. Passengers will be automatically refunded for delayed journeys. They then talk about the mobile phone apps to automate the delay repay scheme. The question is this the answer? There's a really interesting article in The Spectator saying this is not a plan at all. They want to eliminate fragmentation. It's basically a list of goals. Bureaucracy, waste, bring down costs, all the stuff that everyone wants to see. But they're adding more bureaucracy because they're actually setting up these 2 other quangos, Great British Railways and the Passenger Standards Authority. Does that make any sense to you?
Well, partly. I mean, it certainly makes sense if you're going to nationalise the railway to just let the existing contracts lapse. That's a very easy way to do it, and that doesn't have any costs. So that will work. Great British Railways, of course, is a proposal. I think it was Boris Johnson's idea, wasn't it? And that's happening anyway. It certainly makes sense to have, an overarching body with rail expertise that oversees how the railways are run. And if they get that right, that will be a good thing. But of course, bureaucrats tend to act like bureaucrats and get in the way. And that's part of the problem we've had so far.
Now, Labour is insisting the renationalisation will pay for itself. That's the 800 million to 1 billion a year spent by private companies on rail investment will be realised through efficiency gains. Now, the Institute of Economic Affairs has said the Labour proposals are lacking in detail. They are full of contradictions. They have no understanding of how markets work. They talk about bureaucracy being scrapped, but obviously they're now putting more bureaucracy in. And they also say the huge omission from these plans is how to handle an oversized, overpaid and relentlessly militant workforce. And that brings me nicely into these ASLEF strikes. The reason people aren't travelling by rail is that you cannot rely on the service. Everyone seems to be on strike. We're in the 3rd year of it. They want 4 plus 4%, and 4 days a week as a train driver, you get £65,000. Not bad.
Well, it sounds good, but it's a responsible job. I mean, it probably compares to airline pilots, I don't know, or other people in similar jobs, and it's certainly a lot less than the Prime Minister gets paid. Both sides really are digging their heels in. The government just doesn't want to concede to to the unions generally, but to a pay deal that matches inflation. So the unions would argue that they're being asked to accept the pay cut, no matter how generous you think they're paid at the moment. No one likes a pay cut. So one has sympathy with them, but both sides are digging their heels in. The government could settle this easily if they wanted to, but I think they're just picking a fight, really.
So how do you envisage this rolling out? Obviously, it will depend who wins the general election. Do you think full nationalisation is A, possible, and B, is it likely? And I just want to draw your attention, which you will know more than I do, about the rolling stock, because they will have to hire the rolling stock from Roscos. And of course, if they decide they want to buy that all back, that's about 10 billion quid.
Yeah, the Roscos, I think, are a problem. The rolling stock companies. So your train operating companies, maybe people don't understand that, they don't own the trains. They have to lease them in for another company. And certainly in the past, those companies have made huge profits. So that's a kind of source of, if you like, inefficiency or extra cost. The government always has procured the purchase of trains because it's such a big long-term investment. They can't leave it to a short-term franchise. So that will probably continue. But I think if they buy out the Roscoes, yes, that will cost money, but I think it will also make savings in the longer term as well.